Hey guys, welcome back. So, do any of you know what social planning is? So, in town planning is a very broad term. So you have so many different types of planning. For example, you could just have urban planning, which which is the most common one, environmental planning, economic planning, social planning. There's so many different types. But do you guys actually know what social planning is? And my first planning job was environmental advocacy and also social planning, and that is something that I always really incorporate into my game, but I never use the term social planning because actually I don't know why I never use that term. So when you look at social planning, there is so many different types of social planning, but I'm just going to give you guys an example of the most brief one and also what I did in my first town planning job, which was social planning related. So social planning is when you really look after the people. So imagine yourself in your city and thinking, is this place safe? Or can I get to this place easy enough? Does this place make me feel good? Can I get what I want? So that is always something that I'm thinking of whenever I'm building my city. And even if it's just through placing trees or gardens, or you could even just put in little pathways, or for example even the bike path that I have throughout my city is an example. So this is always in the back of my head. And also another example is when you guys always ask me, why do I make the sidewalk larger? And that's because I want to make it larger because it makes it safer. It makes people more further away from the road. So it's giving them a more safer feeling. And then there's always lots of trees everywhere, and you guys know I really love trees, and that is because it just subconsciously makes you feel more happier. So while we go through the cinematic images here, I might just talk about one study I did on the Gold Coast in Australia. So the Gold Coast is where I studied. It's where I lived for 4.5 years, almost 5 years. So there was one social planning study that I did, and like I said, there's so many different types of social planning, but here is one example. There's an area in the Gold Coast called Southport, and it's actually designed now as the CBD for the whole city, even though it's a very low density area. So the study that I had to do was determining where can criminals potentially hide in this new urban area. I had to look at all the alleyways where potentially people could hide, or potentially where people could do things without majority of people being able to see them. I had to look at, can people see you if they're in a building down below? Because when people can see you from, for example, their balcony 5 levels up and they look down, it naturally does make you feel better because you're overlooked. So when you're overlooked like that, it's going to significantly reduce the amount of potential crime that's going to happen. So anyway, I had to analyze all these different things and work out where there could be a crime issue and where we could potentially fix it, what we could do to fix that. And so I had to basically go there and study every little alleyway, every shade made from a tree, every gate, or where to put a gate to stop criminals from going into the dark places or taking people or doing drugs, or even just looking at the types of buildings that could make people feel, oh, that looks a little bit gross, that makes me not want to maybe come back. So I had to look at all of those things and then suggest an outcome, what to do. And so that study was actually really, really interesting to me, and it made me think of just all the little things that can really persuade how you feel in a city, a lot of things that you subconsciously don't know about. So you notice I always really love putting in trees, and that's because it just makes you feel naturally better. So and I always like to have parks everywhere, lots of green space, and also lots of pathways everywhere. So it's really just subconsciously making you feel better, and that is pretty much one example of social planning. So when you're just building your city, just think about, how would you feel if you were in this city? How would you feel about walking in this area? How would you feel about just being able to go to a park? Or how would you feel about walking up this street at night? So you just think about you just really think about how would you feel in that moment, and how would you feel if you want to get from point A to B, and what would you do? So that is always in the back of my mind, and I think it's something that I should have mentioned earlier, because everyone always mentions why I do all these little things, and I always just said, oh, blah blah blah, but I never said it's actual social planning. So now you guys know why. Oh yeah, so I should mention earlier, I was going to mention it earlier, in my first town planning job, the social planning job, what I had to do was, when there was an issue in this, I was working in this neighborhood in the Gold Coast, and the company that I was working for was specifically only for within that neighborhood, and whenever there was some kind of issue, whether that be just a footpath that was run down or the lights were broken, we had to basically get that fixed. We had to implement things that make people feel better. So for example, we even stop things, for example, if there's a building that is outside of the planning scheme, that is, for example, let's say there's a building height of 3 levels, but then, this is an actual example, there was a building height of 3 levels in the area, but then this developer came along and wanted to build, I think, several towers ranging from 10 levels up to, I think, 30 levels, and when that would be implemented, all of the buildings in the surrounding area would be disrupted by the shade from the buildings. It would make their houses a lot cooler because of the shade. It would just make the area a lot more unpleasant, and also the visual appeal would be completely destroyed because that area was quite relaxing. There's a lot of nature in the area, and a lot of skyscrapers in that area would really just ruin that area, and that people would not enjoy it as much as they did if that building went ahead. And unfortunately, that building did go ahead because the developer somehow probably bribed the councillors to actually get it happening, because it's technically illegal how they built it. It's completely out of the planning rules. So anyway, it has caused a real negative impact on that area, if we're being honest, because the amount of traffic that has just came in, it's introduced more than 1,000 new people living in that area, so it's really reduced that, just the social impact of the area. So anyway, that is just one example, and I don't want to go into it too much because I was never really supposed to talk about it, if I'm being honest. Like, all my uni friends would always ask me, they want the gossip, they want to know, but I'd never tell them because I wasn't supposed to. So I'm not going to tell you guys any more about that. So another thing worth mentioning is that you can also look at the demographics of an area. So for example, if you have a really rich area, the need for public transport isn't going to be as much. It's obviously going to be a need for well-kept gardens because that's what they expect. It's going to make them feel a lot better. It's going to make the area a lot richer. And you don't necessarily need a lot of lighting at night because the richer they are, it's not really going to be associated as much as a low socioeconomic area would be with crime. So if you look at a low socioeconomic area, basically a poor area, they're going to need more public transport because they're not necessarily going to have a car. So you're going to also need to make sure that different areas are more lit at night, because obviously if there's a dark alleyway or a dark park at night, that's going to help increase the amount of crime, because things do happen in alleyways and parks at night in low socioeconomic areas. And that is an example of when I was working for the social planning job. The whole neighborhood was kind of low, and it's amazing, when I say low I mean a poorish area, and it's amazing how much the company I worked for turned around that whole place and reduced the crime significantly through social planning. So if you want to hear me talk about more about my experiences, let me know what you think below, because I have so many different ones. I can't really talk about exactly everything in detail, just for security reasons, or don't want to just tell everything that I've worked on, but I can give very broad examples if you guys are interested in that. So anyway, that is all for this video, and thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another video, and thanks for watching. Bye for now, guys.